Oh God, bro, I can't do. I think someday these videos will get posted. Listen, I gave them all to August. It's up to him when to post them. This lady asked me. I think she thought I was like a pro pally person. I don't do awkward events, okay, very often. I understand these are like, this was very emotional, okay, but she did something where they like listened to a song over. So we went to the Nova Festival site, okay? So these are all the people that were killed at the Nova Festival. And then she kind of like gave her story, which is an exceptional story. It's insane. Her and her husband and a bunch of other people are basically just like camped out in the middle of this little box while there are basically like invaders on the outside shooting and killing people, and nobody knows when it's safe to go out. It's quiet for a while, but sometimes they'll hear a person move and like get shot and killed. It's a very, like, I can't imagine. This has to be like an insane event, okay? It's this whole Nova Festival was wild. But then she does the thing where we like all get in a circle and she wants to like play some music and sing a song, and I'm like, and it's so awkward, and I'm just like sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, I can't. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. This is awkward as f. Like, get me out of here. And I think afterwards she comes up to me and she's like, I noticed you weren't reacting very much. And I don't know if she coded me as like some huge like pro-pally person who hated Israelis. I'm like, bro, what do you want me to say?
It's about taking sides. It's about truly come out. I
don't know if it was something that, I don't know how to explain this. Is a little bit more sophisticated, but like when I say that I don't take a side, or I'm not trying to come at it from ideologically, that doesn't mean that I think both sides are right. Oh, and I think she was asking me, because I think typically people that go to these things are like very big, like pro-Zionists, like kill all the Palestinians. I'm like, I mean, that's not really what I'm here for, but oh God, this is fucking awkward. Oh, it's okay. It wasn't that awkward. Sorry. Sorry, I'm not going to do all this, but yeah, this story was insane. All this shit was wacky and wild. Literally just say you're autistic next time. True. Destiny didn't react harder. True. Oh, we went to the, I think it's pronounced Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. That was the neighborhood that people were fighting over the land ownership stuff a long time ago, over disputes over like who lived there originally or when. And I think this guy here, I believe, is one of the original Sheikh Jarrah residents. I think he was. This was interesting to chat with him. Okay, yeah. I don't know. I'm watching all these now, but... Is there anything related? I'm sorry, he brought up the kibbutz stuff. I was just curious if I had any other... You know the Barghouti guy in jail? We talked to this guy's... Is he a cousin, I think? I think he leads one of the political parties in the PLO right now. I don't remember which one. It's a smaller one, but Mustafa Barghouti. We're joined by... Shut up. No one cares. This guy is interesting to chat with. This is in... Oh, what's the city? I don't remember them. Not Hebron. It was in the south. East of East Jerusalem. Where am I? Oh, Ramallah. Ramallah, I think? Maybe. I think this is in Ramallah. Hassan could talk to this guy. Go talk to some real Palestinian leaders. It's kind of crazy because this guy believes in all the fake... Bro, some of these people are pretty wild. But it was interesting to chat with him. He believes in a lot of wacky stuff. But you know, at the end of the day... We all believe in some wacky stuff, you know? Okay, sorry, I'm done. I'm going back.
Were content with being corrupt and governing Gaza and, you know, lining their pockets and living in Qatar and becoming billionaires, but that, like many other terrorist groups and, you know, cults, that they would end up becoming just corrupt and not losing their ideology, but the ideology becomes secondary. And that's the first thing, was there was just a massive error of the conception in Israel.
Do you ever do a trip like this again in the future? Maybe, but I would have to bring like a creative director or somebody with me so that the content actually gets posted in a more timely manner, or somebody else whose like job it is to figure out all of that in a more organized manner.
And then there are the multiple manifold security and military failures of the day and leading up to the day. And there already have been quite a lot of people held to account for that, and there doubtless will be in the future as well. The single thing I heard, which I heard most, and which was most distressing in a way, was the number of people who described to me, you know, who survived the massacres in the south, who said that, you know, they'd said to their children, "Don't worry, the army will be here in minutes, and they weren't. In many places it was many hours till the army got there. And there are reasons for that. There are some reasons that will be military failings, leadership failings. Other things were I discovered were very human failings. I don't want to overstress the failure of the army, because actually certain units and things got down very fast. There was a unit, Douglad, who got down to the junction, by within about an hour, 90 minutes of the massacres starting, and joined in the fight. And then there were self-starters, who I write about in the book, extraordinary people who just broke orders and just realized the magnitude of what's happening and said, we're needed in the south, go, and fought very hard for hours, days, in some cases.
The problem is that for a lot of these local fighters, because all of the kibbutzim and in these communities in the south, they all have like their local armories and their local fighters and stuff. But like, this is to fight, a few people dig a tunnel or a couple people sneak across the wall. Like, these people from Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, these guys showed up with fucking rocket launchers and shit. Or maybe it's not proper to say rocket launchers, maybe rocket propelled grenades, RPGs and stuff. These guys were heavily armed. It was not like the local fighting force was in absolutely no condition to try to repel the invading force on this.
But the complexities on the ground were unbelievable. I mean, as usually happens in warfare, but what they call the fog of war is a very real thing. You know what you can see it in hindsight, but you can't see when you're in it. And one of the things that made it very complicated was, for instance, Hamas coming in, taking uniforms off dead Israelis, wearing them, coming in with Israeli-style apparatus on them. There's a Muslim doctor I quote in the book I interviewed who describes how he was going to he's an Israeli Muslim Arab, and he's a doctor, he was going to his shift at the hospital at 6:30 in the morning. The rockets start coming in, because the rockets started first and then the full invasion. And he described to me how he's one of the members of this group, the United Hatzalah, which is a first responders group, and they sort of they get an alert and it tells them that a car has crashed nearby, and they put on their first aid kit and so on again.
Is the rumor true that the IDF waited to respond intentionally? If not, why do people say this? People say it because of all sorts of reasons, and it's Jews, so it's always going to be crazy shit. But there's just no chance that the IDF that anything like that could have possibly happened without every single person knowing about it instantly and like rebelling against the country. Believe it or not, Jews are human too, and the idea that a Jewish soldier would hear, hey, there's a whole bunch of your fellow countrymen being slaughtered, in the country, but we're going to go ahead and wait a little bit to optimize our PR. There's just there's no chance that would ever be the case. They just wouldn't be able to bear it. There's no way.
And he got one of those alerts at one of the junctions and realized there was a car, that something had happened and there were some dead bodies, and he stops and he sees these men dressed as soldiers. And they just start, and he's wearing his Hatzalah gear, and they start firing at him. And he just thinks, what the hell is going on? And they turned out to be Hamas dressed as Israeli soldiers. They used him as a human shield to try to protect from any air assault. And in the end, they shot him and left him, and he survived. He's a very, very brave man. So there was a lot of confusion like that. There was a girl whose father I interviewed. She was at the Nova party, and I met him at one of the reunions of the party in the weeks after, and the reunions of the survivors and family and so on. And he described how in the last moments of his daughter's life, she phoned him on her phone, like a lot of people, and he reassured her the army would get there and so on. And her boyfriend was shot in the head and was lying on her lap, and she was obviously panicked. And they managed to get into a car and escape the party, but they went to a community where they thought they'd be safe in the south of Israel. And they were told to stay where they were by somebody who she said was a policeman. And he wasn't a policeman, he was Hamas, dressed as police. And she died, she was shot and killed as well. And so there was a lot of confusion like that. Hopefully the world will find out exactly what went wrong. Israel will find out exactly what went wrong that led to this catastrophe. But I mean, it was a complete catastrophe.
Do you have a sense of how such an intelligence failure could have happened? So there's a bit of a temptation to go into...
It's unfathomable to me. And it's crazy that Netanyahu will probably never be held accountable just because of the string of military successes they had at the in the past year. Or, I mean, I say that, but I don't know. I'm not. Maybe this is still like an active, like ongoing debate that people are talking about. But it feels like, yeah, I can't say that. I guess I'm not from Israel. So I don't know. Maybe there's still active investigation, but it's insane the failures that happen there.
The conspiracy land. Because it's such a giant intelligence failure, it seems that there is some manipulation on the inside for political reasons or for...
It's not even so much the intelligence failure, it's the response time as well. Israel is a very, very, very small country. This is an insanely small country. basically a couple hours of driving to get from almost anywhere in that country to almost anywhere else, depending on traffic. So the idea that it was taking so long for the IDF to respond, that this was just like dragging on throughout the day, it was just like unhinged.
You don't need to go into conspiracy land. I mean, I think there are people who say that there were parts of the intelligence network and so on that were withholding the information. I don't know. Again, people will find out. There's an awful lot of politics inside Israel, and it's hard to know that at this stage. I think most people are sort of still Israeli and not Israeli, including people who are anti-Israel, who just believe that Israeli military and particularly intelligence dominance is so strong that there must have been some kind of conspiracy. Otherwise, how could this have happened? I don't think you need to go into that. I think that, for instance, some of the young women at the observation base are on the record. They've said, I've spoken to them myself, and who said that they had been warning in the weeks running up to the 7th that they were seeing maneuvers and training by the border, which suggested that Hamas was going to do something like this. And they say that they were ignored. Though you speak to some of the more senior commanders about that, and they say the thing is that this stuff was happening all the time.
That's always the big one. It's the same thing with Benghazi. People always say that like America had warnings about 9/11 or about Benghazi or about whatever. And it's like, yeah, but one thing you don't see is that there are warnings of things that are happening almost always. It's a matter of vetting and verifying like what is reliable. What is actually, is it something actually going to happen because people are planning stuff, monster stuff at all hours of the day, at all days of the week, all weeks of the month, all months of the year. And it's hard to know like what's serious and what's not serious, Yeah.
So it's very hard to know at the moment.
Can you talk through your understanding of who and what Hamas is, its history, and the governing ideology of this group?
Well, Hamas, in a way, quite easy to understand because they say what their ambitions are. They say what their beliefs are. They've said it from their governing charter onwards. And you also have the advantage with Hamas that they, as it were, in trying to understand them, is that they tend to do what they say and act on what they believe. The primary aim of Hamas is to destroy the state of Israel and then see. They're not an unusual group, sadly. The bit of it that is hard for some people to understand, I think, is that they really do mean what they say, and that they really do mean what they say they want to do. And I give a number of examples in the book of this, but the most obvious is the case of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, who is generally regarded as having orchestrated and arranged the 7th of October. We know a fair amount about...
Sinwar was, we saw him in the video, remember, on the very peaceful Great March of Return. That was very peaceful, according to Noah Samson. He was there on day one, walking up and down the border with some of the people. It's important for him to be seen there. He was the leader of the Gaza Strip at the time, party of the Hamas, right? I believe that Sinwar was one of the people who was given back to the Gaza Strip in that huge prisoner exchange after 2006 when they captured... it was the one Israeli soldier, and they ended up trading like 1,000+ prisoners in exchange for him. I should remember this guy's fucking name, but I think Sinwar was one of the people given back. So, oof, not good. When they talk about prisoner exchange, it's Galit Shaid or something. I'm making this up, but huge. I keep fucking forgetting. I need to not forget this. Gilad Shalit. Gilad Shalit. Okay, hold on. So he wasn't captured in 2006. Was he captured in 2010? 2011? But...
about him because he was in prison in Israel in the 2000s for murdering Palestinians.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, he said it.
In Gaza. And he was released in the prisoner swap he's one of the more than 1,000 Palestinian...
I just wasted my time fucking wicking this. I like this guy knows a lot about a lot of different things. Seems like this dude's pretty smart.
Prisoners inside Israel who was released in a swap for Gilad Shalit, the abducted Israeli soldier.
Yeah.
And Yahya Sinwar in prison in Israel talked to, among others, a dentist who ended up saving his life because Yahya Sinwar had a brain tumor, and this dentist identified this and actually sent him to the hospital. The Israelis famously removed the tumor and saved Sinwar's life. But this dentist used to speak to him in the prison, not very regularly, and has related, not least to the New York Times, his conversations with Sinwar. And Sinwar said in one of those conversations, he said, at the moment you, Israel, are strong, but one day you'll be weak, and then I'll come. And that's what he did.
Is it a hatred of Israel?
I didn't bring my science. It's okay.
Or is it a hatred of Jews? Is it on the level of nations or the level of religion?
Ooh, this is going to be our big disagreement probably. Maybe this guy's going to think it's way more. Me traveling to the space platform, I don't get to bring up the inventory with me? That seems kind of cringe. If I travel, it doesn't launch this up at the same time?
Both. It's both. I mean, it originates from a religious mindset, but it's, of course, political as well.
Okay, maybe we have more agreement than not there.
In the Hamas Charter, of course, some people sort of think the Hamas Charter is of no significance, and I often notice this sleight of hand that people do. Again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, forget everything other than the most important basic things. But the Hamas Charter, among other things, quotes the hadith that, the end times will not come until all of the rocks and the trees shout out, "Oh Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." And that is... So Hamas is both obviously anti-Israeli, obviously, and anti-Jewish, obviously. And by the way, I mean, one of the many painful stories I tell in the book is of the fact that so many of the people in the communities that they attacked, it's not as if there'd be a right community to attack and a wrong community to attack, but that many of the communities they attacked were communities which deeply, deeply dreamed of the idea of living in peace with their Palestinian neighbors. There's a woman whose name has become relatively famous certainly famous inside Israel, Vivian Silva, who was a peace activist who spent every weekend driving Gazan children from the border to, if they had very rare medical needs that could not be seen attention to inside Gaza, would drive them to Israeli hospitals. And she spent every weekend doing that. Worked for all of the sort of left-wing peacenik organizations in Israel. And for a while after the 7th, her neighbors and others thought that she had been taken captive into Gaza, and actually there was a hostage poster for her, and there were appeals by the various peacenik organizations for Hamas to hand her over, but it turned out she'd been burned alive in her home, and this wasn't discovered for quite a long time because there was so little DNA left of her that it was very hard to identify the
He has a debate with Mehdi Hassan?
remains as being hers. So there were a lot of people in the Gaza envelope, as it's called in Israel, in the area around Gaza, who would have been the people who wanted to live peacefully with the Gazans someday. And there's a certain, among the many, it's not an irony, but just among the sort of pains of the day is that so overwhelmingly these are the people that Hamas brought hell to.
The response to October 7th by Israel. Can you steel me on the case that Israel went too far?
Well, the case that started from very early on that critics of Israel had was the claim that,
Any
I think I
response
first
was
heard
too
it on about
much.
the 8th of October, before Israel had done anything in response, was the claim that Israel must act proportionately in response. And I have a critique of this that I've often expressed, which is that there is such a thing as proportionality in warfare.
Proportionality can only be done when there's like a mutual understanding to play by a certain set of rules between you and your opponent. October 7th was not an attack done with the expectation of proportionality given. You would, like, another nation that would do an attack like that on you would never expect a proportional response. If Russia had launched a missile into Texas or California or whatever the fuck else and blown up, and killed 2,000 civilians, Russia is not expecting a proportional response. Would never be the case. When Iran and Israel attack each other, they do expect proportional responses. These are nation states and they conduct themselves like nation states. Hamas does not, even though they are a governing administrative body, they don't conduct themselves like one, and they don't fight with the expectation of a proportional response. They'll ask for one internationally because it helps their propaganda, but this is not a proportional response environment.
I have a critique of this that I've often expressed, which is that there is such a thing as
one of the key reasons why proportional responses exist is because you want to maintain some level of even-handedness between you and the other people that you're fighting with. But Hamas doesn't fight with when Hamas is fighting, they're not showing restraint. They're literally doing as much as they can. Like if they could have killed 2,000 people, they would have. If they could have killed 10,000 people, they would have. If they could have killed every Israeli, they would have. There is no point in being restrained or being proportionate with that enemy because they're not playing proportionally. They're always trying to effect the maximum amount of damage on you.
Proportionality in warfare. And at the same time, Israel is always accused of acting disproportionately. And
Israel acts very proportionally. Well, I shouldn't say that. Well, they had a policy of intentional disproportionate behavior, I guess I would say, before 73. But after that, I mean, like most of what they deal with in regards to, how they dealt with Hezbollah, how they dealt with Iran is generally, I would say, in the ballpark of proportionality. They're not just indiscriminately bombing everything.
proportionality that much of the rest of the world seems to think Israel should express in warfare is to have an equal
number of deaths,
an equal level of suffering or killing on both sides. I don't think there's any law of war that says that if you kill 1,200 people and you kidnap another 250, where the other side's allowed to do the same back. But that's what a lot of people think. And then when they see the death toll escalating on the Gazan side, they say Israel has acted disproportionately and has overreacted. That one is tricky because it's my belief that, I mean, again, this is a basic thing, but it has to be stated that 9 million citizens of Israel, if you extrapolate that out to what the 7th of October would have meant in American terms, you'd be talking about a day on which, if the attack had happened in America, where 44,000 Americans were killed in one day and 10,000 American citizens taken hostage. Nobody can tell me that if such an atrocity occurred, that America would not do whatever it needed.
Yeah, good. This guy's such a smart dude. Douglas Murray. Okay. I feel like I have such a negative impression. I don't know why.
To destroy the groups that had done that and to retrieve the hostages who had been taken.
So just on that point, I agree with you 100%. America would hit hard back. And I think a lot of Americans would feel justified in that. But it's also possible that the military-industrial complex and the politicians would do something like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, which means extend far beyond hitting back. And
that's the whole point, though. America wouldn't do a proportional response. No first world country is doing a proportional response in response to a terrorist attack. The response is the complete and utter annihilation or eradication of the other side, right? Because it's a terrorist entity. They're not here to play proportional responses. They're always attempting to inflict the maximum amount of damage. The reason why you do proportional responses partially is because you want the other side to show a reasonable amount of restraint, right? And a terrorist entity is never showing restraint, so there's no incentive to do proportional response, right?
And actually do a thing that's destructive to everybody, including America financially, and the flourishing of America and the flourishing of humanity broadly, and the region, and the stability, and the war on terrorism, if that's a real thing. The war in Iraq and Afghanistan did not maybe succeed in defeating terrorism or even making progress. It probably made more terrorists than not. So there's a justified feeling of hitting back and going after somebody like bin Laden in the case of 9/11. And then there's just the actual implementation. And it seems like the implementation can sometimes, unintended or unintended, have consequences that are bordering on war crimes, if not downright war crimes. Now, this is a general statement. And now we'll look at Israel, where things are small land. Everything is very compact. There's a lot of complexities that are well studied that we've talked about extensively.
Well, the two stated aims of the Israelis after the 7th were to get the hostages back and to destroy Hamas. And many people said that you could do one, but not both. And
in that case, Israel was always, whether they would say it or not, was always optimizing for eliminating Hamas over eliminating or over recovering the hostages, of course, which is also reasonable, but tough to sell to your population, maybe.
I actually think they've gone a long way to doing both. By no means everything. There are still hostages as we're speaking held in Gaza, including a young American. And Hamas is not completely destroyed. It's very, very significantly degraded, but it's not completely destroyed. But those are the two aims. I believe that, I've seen as much of the war as any outside observer. I don't know, there are some exceptions maybe, but...
Proportionality is about your own values, not about revenge. So who the fuck cares how bad Hamas is? Don't LARP as a Western democracy otherwise? No, this is a childlike understanding of war. Proportionality is important because it tells everybody that everybody is still playing within a certain boundary and you're all agreeing to play within the rules and you're not trying to eradicate or obliterate one group in the world. If you're a side and you're not playing under the rules of proportionality, if it's very obvious or evident to everybody else that your goal is utter destruction, then you will be annihilated. And you should be, because the world doesn't work with bad actors like that on the planet. It's dysfunctional. You end up becoming, it's like that tit for tat stuff. You end up having somebody who is abusing the goodwill of the system now, and it's making it impossible for other people to play within any reasonable set of expectations or boundaries because one side is now abusing the rules-based international world, whatever.
And so I think I can say with considerable certainty what the Israelis have and haven't done. There were various operations at the beginning, various plans which didn't happen, like storming straight in and getting, for instance, as many hostages as possible out of the Shifa complex, which is called a hospital, but it's also at the very least the Hamas command headquarters.
Yeah. And
there was a plan to maybe go and do that fast, but it was avoided because of the number of deaths on all sides that would be likely to happen. The Israelis did actually hold back at the beginning. There was a period of making sure that when they
Because the United States, I'm pretty sure it's because the United States pressured them so much too.
went into Gaza, they didn't do so in any way blind. But Gaza is a very built-up area, and population-wise is densely populated. Something, by the way, which the people who claim frivolously that Israel has been committing genocide never take account of, which is the fact that the Gaza population has boomed since the Israeli withdrawal in 2005. It's almost doubled. But yes, it's a densely populated area, and it's an incredibly difficult place for the train of war because of one thing in particular, which is that Hamas goes back a bit to our conversation earlier. This is much more.
Is he going to say the thing? Hamas's goal is always to optimize for civilian death. Hamas wants the maximum amount of civilian casualties at all points in time. Every single part of their war doctrine revolves around it, whether that means the refusal to build shelters for civilians, the refusal to have safe areas for civilians, like guaranteeing humanitarian corridors, the refusal for their fighters to wear combat uniforms so that there's always operational confusion over who's actually Hamas and who's actually just an ordinary civilian, right? They optimize. Hamas's battle strategy optimizes in one of the most difficult environments in the world to conduct warfare. They optimize for civilian casualties.
More extreme example, I mean, Hamas really don't play by the rules. In fact, they use the rules of war, the laws of war, completely to their own advantage. You know, it has to be reiterated. You are not meant to disguise your army as civilians. You're not meant to use places of
worship,
care, like hospitals.
Or hospitals, or apartments, things that Amnesty International have all observed Hamas doing, yes.
Bases for your military operations. You're not meant to use schools and places of worship as operating centers of war. And Hamas does all of these things and has always done so. And it does so with the very obvious reason that for them, the whole thing is a 2-for-1 offer. You get to operate everywhere. And if the Israelis operate anywhere, you claim that this is a war crime, because how could they attack this group of civilians? These people who are dressed as civilians, these people merely fighting from a mosque, and so on. And that's why everybody who's been to Gaza, who's seen the fighting, knows the same thing, which is this is just incredibly difficult warfare of a kind that American troops have seen in the last 20 years in Fallujah and elsewhere. Kurdish militia, the Peshmerga, saw when they were fighting as our frontline troops in the war against ISIS. Similar house to house, but by no means with the same entrenched bases. Again, it can't be stressed enough that Hamas has used the years since the Israeli withdrawal from 2005 to build this vast
more tunnels,
underground tunnel network. And
so
again,
many tunnels.
It's obvious, but it has to be remembered. And I quote one of Hamas leaders in the book saying this in an interview, when they build their tunnels, they do so in order that their tunnels are used by them, Hamas, to store their weaponry, to secure their fighters, and to hold hostages. They do not build their underground tunnel networks for the safety of Gazan civilians, avoiding aerial bombardment.
True.
And, every difference in the world seems to me to exist between a country which does build bomb shelters for its citizens
versus just for their fighters.
A government which builds bomb shelters for its bombs.
Can you discuss the flow of money here? So how does Hamas, the leadership, use the money? So you started to talk about the tunnels, but how much corruption is there? Can you just lay it all out? Because I think that's an important part of the picture here.
It's totally corrupt. Every Hamas leader who's now dead died a billionaire.
With a B.
With a B. To say that they used Gaza's resources, or the resources that came into Gaza, for their own ends is to just vastly understate matters. Hamas used everything that came in to build the infrastructure of terror that allowed them to do the 7th and everything since. They militarized the whole of Gaza. They, by the estimations of troops I've been with there, every second to third house had weaponry stashed there. Bombs, RPGs, Kalashnikovs, rockets, tunnel entrances. The network that they just embedded all these years was total. They one of the many tragedies of this is that whatever you're reading of the rights and wrongs of the Israeli withdrawal in 2005, it was an opportunity for the Gaza to become something else. It could have become a thriving statelet. It could have been a thriving Palestinian state. It's just that Hamas, like the PLO before them, decided that they wanted to destroy Israel more than they wanted to create a Palestinian state. And that is to the great detriment of the Palestinians of Gaza, to put it at its mildest.
So just to outline here, leadership of Hamas are stealing the money that gets sent by Qatar, by everybody. So they're putting in their pocket, and then
By the American taxpayer and by the European taxpayer as well, yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's not just about the stealing of money. It's about using the money and the infrastructure to annihilate your neighbor. I mean, that's
those two things. But the corruption is a signal from an economic perspective, but it's also a signal of deep moral corruption because they're screwing over the Palestinian people.
Yes, a cynicism, certainly, yeah.
Okay, and then the money they do spend on the Palestinian cause, they're not doing that to build up Gaza. They're doing it to strengthen the military.
They're building up Gaza, all right. Well, they're building it down, but just to be a military hellhole.
Capabilities
Yes.
of the terrorist organization Hamas. You have, maybe you can correct me on this, have said that the people of Gaza have some significant responsibility for the actions of Hamas.
Yes.
Because they've elected them.
They elected them. The what-ifs are endless, but very
I don't like that one. They did elect them a long time ago. Would Hamas win elections again today? Maybe. Well, today, maybe not. Prior to October 7th, maybe. But the situation is, I feel like the situation is a little bit more complex than that. The big issue, I feel, is the fact that Hamas is not part of the PLO or the PA. So it's like your only party kind of in the guy. That's a rough one. I don't know. That's a rough one.
unwise of the George W. Bush administration to push for elections in Gaza after 2005. But Hamas were elected, and they then, in 2007, killed the other Palestinian faction that was their main challenger, Fatah, killed them, threw them off rooftops, dragged their bodies behind motorbikes through the Gaza, and from that point they had total control.
So nobody brings this up, okay? But if for your pro-Pallies out there that want to make a strong pro-Pally argument, Hamas did kill Fatah, which was the other party in the region. The reason why they killed them, though, maybe they would have done it otherwise, but the big reason why they killed them is because after the results of the election and Hamas won, Israel and the United States saw that, said this is really fucked, and then we're working with Fatah to plan a coup to overthrow Hamas. This is one of the reasons why Hamas was like, oh, really? Well, we're just going to fucking kill you guys. So half of this is being presented. They're not to defend Hamas or say that it's good that Hamas won the elections, but there's a reason why they why they killed Fatah.
And you know, this is difficult because you can get into the realm of being accused of advocating or in any way justifying collective punishment if you talk about this. But it should be borne in mind that, you know, Hamas had effectively 18 years to run the Gaza, and that's the time that it takes from the birth of a child to the end of their formal education. And in 18 years, they could have presided over and produced a generation of young Gazans who were productive.
The reason why this won't happen or why this can't happen is because you can't forget the original, the Palestinian plight. And to have a successful Gaza Strip that is laying in the shadow of their former home in Israel proper, what they would say Palestine, would be to essentially fulfill the Israeli proclamation of, look, you guys can live here, you're fine. Like, Palestinians don't need a state. You have your area down here, we've got our area up here. So unless something significant changes, I don't foresee them ever trying to build that successful state. They don't want one because it would just look like they're vindicating the belief, the notion that, oh, well, look, you guys didn't actually need a state. You're fine, you know?
A generation of young Gazans who were productive for their people, for their society, for their neighbors, for the rest of the world, and they didn't. They spent 18 years indoctrinating the children of Gaza into a death cult and into...
Part of this, maybe even the majority of this, personally, I feel can be laid at the fault, or the fault can be laid at the feet of the Western world and all of the delusional pro-Palestinian supporters that basically encourage these delusions of telling them, as long as you guys infinitely resist, as long as you guys infinitely fight against Israel, one day you will have your state. This stupid idea that the Palestinian people have never suffered any real political loss because regardless of how many attacks they do, regardless of how many mortars or how many rockets or how many, whatever, you know, how many tunnels are built, there's always the 67 borders that they can go back to. No matter what, the negotiations have to start at the 67 borders. Like, okay, well, in that case, it would be stupid of the Palestinian people to do any kind of formal agreement because they can always just go back to that and say, okay, well, let's just go back to this and, you know, let's just, okay, well, that a terrorist attack failed, let's go back to 67. Okay, well, that tunnel network got clogged, let's go back to 67. Like, right now, both sides are just incentivized to fight forever, you know, I feel.
A genocidal hatred, which obviously was most dangerous to the Israelis. But it was obviously disastrous for the people of Gaza. And there is there's just, if you speak to soldiers who were there in 2014 when Hamas started a war again, one of a set of rounds of war since 2005. If you speak to the soldiers who were there in 2014 going house to house and who were also involved in the war since 2003, they all say the same thing, which is the marked radicalization of the Gazan population. The marked increase in just, it's so banal in a way to even cite, like the numbers of copies of Mein Kampf in Arabic in an average Gazan household, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. There are so many what ifs and other paths that Hamas could have taken, but that was the one they took. They decided to take the path of using their time in power to build up their infrastructure, radicalize the population, and encourage them to believe that they could destroy the state of Israel. And then on October the 7th, they gave it their best shot. And by the way, there is no organized collective.
Is it possible for Hamas to build a bomb shelter? They aren't allowed building materials, and the IDF would bomb them and call them terrorist tunnels. It's a stupid argument. Yeah, you're just wrong. What do you mean? They aren't allowed building materials. Where the fuck do you think all the tunnels came from? Those are not, they're not like fucking hobo loser tunnels. Those are some nice fucking tunnels they've got dug under there. They got electricity. I think they've got ventilation for all of them. Some parts of them might even have running water. Like they've got, those tunnels they're big ass fucking, those are huge dig outs. Where do you think all the cement and everything that's being shipped to the Gaza Strip is going towards?
Punishment of the citizens of Gaza. Collective punishment would just be dropping bombs with no purpose across civilian areas, carpet bombing, this sort of thing. This is simply not what the IAF and the IDF have done since the 7th. They have been fighting a house-to-house war against this terrorist group. They do aerial strikes. Gaza is very, very badly beaten up. The buildings, the infrastructure that existed, there aren't many buildings standing. But this is not the result of just wild and imprecise bombing by the Israelis. It's been extremely concerted. It's extremely difficult. But when people say, well, this must be collective punishment, I think that the people who say that, simultaneously, that's not true. And also, there is not a hostage who's come out President Trump made this point recently. There is not a hostage who's come out who I've spoken with who found any Gazan Palestinian who expressed even the slightest human kindness to them. If you look at the footage from the 7th that Hamas recorded themselves of them taking young Jewish women into Gaza and so on, you will notice that the trucks and the motorbikes and so on are not stopped by horrified Gazan civilians saying, why have you got this Israeli girl whose tendons you've cut, and why are you bringing her here? It's all celebration. It's all celebration. And it's the same with, there's a couple of cases of hostages who managed to escape from the civilian houses they were being held in, who were immediately returned by the citizens they met.
Yeah, the celebration, I do wonder what percent of the population they represent, but there's something really dark. There's several ways to explain the celebration. It could be that there's a deep indoctrination where you do legitimately hate Jews. And there also could be a place of just deep desperation. And it's a kind of relief that you have to convince yourself that you're on the side of fighting for freedom.
That's the
in order to
indoctrination
justify
part.
to yourself that this is the right way to fight out of desperation.
No, it's the
extremely harsh conditions.
It's the
Because the
indoctrination
way
part.
we're kind of speaking about this with the celebration, it's very easy to project a kind of evil on the populace that I just am very hesitant to project, especially on the general populace.
You don't have to project it onto them. You can just listen.
You
to
can
their
just
own
listen to
words.
what they say.
Well, I'm sure you've heard one of many audio recordings you hear from the morning, but I'm sure you've heard the audio recording of the young man who
calling his father.
ends up in one of the communities in the south of Israel and calls back home. Have you heard that?
Yes, I've heard it.
I quoted in the first chapter of the book. He calls back home and he says to his father, who picks up, it's on WhatsApp. I think he's on the phone. He's saying, turn on to WhatsApp because I can show you. He says, I've killed 10 Jews with my own hands. So, Father, your son has killed 10 Jews. And his father is saying, where are you? Where are you? He goes, I want to show you, Dad. I want to show you. I've killed Jews with my own hands. Your son. Put mother on the phone. Mother comes on the phone. The brother comes on the phone. This is one of many, many stories from the day that suggests something which I would say is not just indoctrination, but yes, evil.
First
Well,
of all,
it's-
those
I
phone
mean, they're
calls are
indoctrinated,
somehow
right? Like-
uniquely horrific. But I've also heard recordings of phone calls made by Ukrainian soldiers to their parents and Russian soldiers to their parents. And they have not as intense and not as horrific, but they have a similar nature to them, which there's an aspect of war where you dehumanize.
I don't like the comparison there. Like if there were, I would say it would be disgusting, and I would condemn even Ukrainians for doing this. If there were phone calls of Ukrainians calling back who had like invaded and killed Russians in like just Russian civilians. That's what you have to do to make that comparable. The situation is just so dissimilar. I bet even Russians don't even get like a sick kick as much as Anna or I don't know, the Ukrainians might hate. Like, I don't even think Russians are fully on board with the indoctrination of like hating Ukrainians. It's just a totally different type of thing. I feel like it's a way more Putin nationalistic kind of like push to reclaim the old Soviet empire. Whereas like Palestinian, I feel more strongly about this. There's no shot that like Russian children grow up hating Ukrainians. I don't believe that. Not in the same way that Palestinian children are taught to hate people in Israel or Jews in general. There's no shot. No, I don't believe that.
No, it's the other side.
Yeah,
right?
The average Russian soldier probably, my guess is, doesn't care that much in terms of like having this deep, seething ideological hatred. Maybe some people, maybe like in Wagner, maybe those people are a little bit more driven, but I feel like the average Russian soldier is probably more apathetic than anything else, would be my guess. But
sure, in order to fight that war. So we have to remember that element is going to be there in a time of war, in a time of desperation.
It would be a strange type of simple sort of...
Like, these are terrorist attacks. Like, not to overuse the word terrorist, but it's a way, way, way different vibe.
I don't know, pride in war, to go into an 80-year-old woman's house and kill her on her floor and then film her dead body, her body in its final moments, and send it round to all of that woman's friends on her phone, on her Instagram account. You may have heard different things from me, but I mean, I would be surprised if there were even the most vociferous of Russian soldiers phoning back home to Moscow and saying, "Mum, you won't believe my luck. I managed to rape and kill this 80-year-old woman." That's quite unusual, even in warfare.
Quite unusual.
And that's one of the things about Hamas and what I describe as the death cult types, which makes them different from other people.
But that's the channeling of evil and hatred and anger in the human spirit, but that doesn't make that person evil.
No, I disagree.
You commit that once.
I think that there is.
I mean, like, the question, like, I mean, Lex kind of has a point here, maybe, in terms of how do we call things evil. But, like, if you're not willing to call that evil, then I think your position is you don't believe evil exists in humans. There's always, like, some other explaining factor, which, I mean, you can go down that route, but clearly you're arguing something a bit different than what Murray is getting at.
There's such a force as evil in the world, and I think it can descend and it can be used. And it's very hard to find a non-theological way to talk about this, but of everything I've seen, there are actions that people like Hamas committed on the 7th that cannot be described as anything other than evil. The things that happened at the Nova Party were especially appalling. I mean, it was all appalling, but it was especially appalling because, first of all, it's a sort of party which people like you and I, or at least you and I when we were younger, might have been at. And so everyone knows, the world of a dance party and all night, rave in the desert to commune with nature and the universe and to take some psychedelics and to, expand your consciousness and your love and all of that sort of thing. The fact that people doing that at 6:30 in the morning then encountered people coming in to the party on trucks and military vehicles and just massacring them and raping them. And I mean, I give examples of the first-hand accounts of people who survived, but I mean, it's beyond belief of almost anything else I've covered in war. And it's because it seems so... I mean, an army facing another army is one thing. A terrorist group in civilian clothing facing an army is another thing. But a terrorist group facing a group of young people
Fuck, I'm making way too much of
at a
this shit.
dance, unarmed, and doing what they did is pretty hard to comprehend unless you use the lexicon of evil somewhere.
So that stated, can you empathize with the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza, with the destruction that resulted as a response?
Yes. What has happened in response is terrible for the citizens of Gaza. I was there on the first time, a couple of days early into the ground invasion, when the citizens of Gaza were coming south. I was in the middle of the strip, and the humanitarian corridor had been set up to try to stop the hostages being taken.
I just get average Russians aren't as propagandists into hitting Ukrainians. Have you seen their media, Telegram channels, and war crimes? Individual soldiers too. They're on the same level as terror attack. Maybe now after the war has gone on, but you're saying, I don't think prior to like the actual war, the Russian citizens were as hateful of Ukrainians or other Eastern Europeans. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I find that hard to believe.
Taken south, deeper into Gaza, and to try to stop the Hamas leadership from making it south. It didn't really work because they'd already got a lot of the hostages south. It was an attempt to keep Hamas there and fight them in the north so as not to be dragged all the way in. In the end, it dragged all the way in anyway. But yes, I mean, watching the citizens of Gaza moving through the humanitarian corridor, and everyone was being checked for bombs, suicide vests, checked for particularly young men of military age, and I mean, you look at this tide of human misery, and you think this is terrible. But this is a terrible thing that had been brought upon them by the people who had been misgoverning the place that they lived in, and of course, on a human level, you feel terrible that these people are going through this. At the same time, human empathy for them can coexist beside an unspeakable anger that they had come to this point because of the fact that they elected a terror group to run their territory. And one of the things, obviously, is that a lot of people like to say, and it's true, of course, that this didn't all start on October the 7th. Absolutely true.
When did it start,
this particularly intense round of war started on October the 7th, without doubt. Hamas did not have to attack on October the 7th. It wasn't like they were forced to liberate themselves or something, as some of the defenders of Hamas claim. But the conflict, of course, goes back a lot earlier. But you will have to always keep on contending with this fact that there is one central
narrative
issue to the paradigm of that conflict. What used to be called the Arab-Israeli conflict and now has become
the Palestinian-Israeli
branded the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah,
but there is one absolutely essential issue to this, which cannot be forgotten, which is, do the Palestinians want a state, or do they want to destroy the Jewish state? And if they want to destroy the Jewish state, as they've tried many times, it's a disaster for them. It's a total disaster for them. If they want to create their own state, they've already had several very good shots at it, one of which is Gaza post-2005. But they've never shown in their leadership the desire to live with a Jewish state. And that's a catastrophe for the Palestinians.
Can you steel man the case of the lived experience of Palestinians and pro-Palestinian voices that describe the Gaza situation as a occupation? The West Bank too, and in the case of Gaza, open-air prison?
To take them in order, there's nothing about Gaza that was an open-air prison. They had ability to trade, they had the ability to move in and out in increasing numbers. Egypt wasn't so keen on allowing Palestinians from Gaza into Egypt, still isn't. But at the time of the 7th, there was actually one of the things the international community was pushing for was for more Palestinians to be coming into Israel every day through the Eretz crossing and others to work in Israel, because they can make a better living in Israel than they can in Gaza. And the as it were, normalization route was slowly being attempted. It was being pushed on Israel by the international community a little bit too fast for Israel's comfort, but it happened. That completely came to an end, and that dream is gone. Since the 7th of October.
Can you clarify the dream, the normalization
dream
between Gaza and Israel?
Gone. There will be,
really?
No normalization. No, not after that. And one of the reasons is the number of people, again, who I've spoken with who employed Palestinians, worked with Palestinians.
Unfortunately, a lot of that got rolled
encouraged
back.
more Palestinians to be coming from Gaza in order to work in Israel, and these were their brothers and sisters and so on and so forth. One of the reasons why the massacres of the 7th were so successful in the kibbutzim, the community.
I don't know if he's going to repeat one of the reasons why the massacres were so successful is because Hamas was able to map out a lot of the kibbutzim beforehand. Wait, kibbutzim, was that the plural? That was the plural one, right? However, I don't believe, now maybe it's just hard to gather this evidence, but I don't believe there was any evidence that any of the people that were on work permits in the kibbutzim, I don't think there was evidence that they themselves were the ones that were planning or were providing intel to let people map that out. Now, I could be, maybe something else has come to light, and maybe it's just impossible to gather that evidence for a variety of reasons, because it would be destroyed by now. It would be just impossible to penetrate that deeply. I think that's what he's about to say, though.
In the south, was because of the number of the
temporary
terrorists who came in with detailed house-to-house maps of
that
those
is true.
communities.
They did.
I spoke with one man who, his community, they had a security officer, chief, and Hamas came in. They knew to go and kill him and his family first, and then which families. It was just, I've seen the maps myself. They came in with incredibly accurate information about these communities. How did they have them? Because it was given to them by the brothers, by the workers.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not.
Who were coming in and out. So there was.
But if you were somebody that lived there, it would probably feel true, and that's all that would really matter. Yeah.
Nobody that will trust that ever again.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Palestinians that have lived and flourished inside Israel. What are they saying? What are they feeling? And what are the Israelis feeling about them? Is there still camaraderie to some degree, or is it completely destroyed?
My observation at the beginning was that everyone was extremely wary. I mean, if you've worked beside somebody and then found out they sold out your family, you will never trust again. And that, particularly in a small country like Israel, the word of that happening goes out very fast. At the very beginning, there was intense fear about that, including of the 20% or so of the population who are Arab Israelis. I actually think one of the few sort of positive news stories of the period is that that population within Israel has by and large held. There hasn't been an intifada. One of the reasons why there hasn't been more terrorist activity in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria is because the Israelis have been very careful, along with the Palestinian Authority, to some extent cooperating to keep that down. But, there wasn't a full war on three fronts, for instance, which was at risk of happening. So I think that the sort of coexistence within Israel has pretty much held. There are some terrible examples, far too regular, but not as regular as it could happen, of Muslim Arab Israelis carrying out acts of terror in, as it were, sympathy with Hamas. I was in the middle of one such attack myself late last year, and in a town called Hadera. And those things have happened, but it's not that particular catastrophe has not occurred.
Can we talk about Benjamin Netanyahu? For a lot of people, we spoke of evil. They refer to him as evil. On the spectrum between good and evil, as a leader, where does Netanyahu fall?
Well, he's certainly not evil. Interesting if people looking at this conflict were to be reluctant to use the word evil of Hamas and eager to use it of the Israeli Prime Minister. It would be sort of telling, I would say. Can
we just actually linger on that point? There's a point you've made multiple times, which is we're more eager to criticize and maybe even over-exaggerate the criticism of democratically elected leaders.
Yes.
It's a dark, weird, other quality of discourse at parties, aforementioned parties.
Isn't it also, not to be flippant for a moment, it's a little bit like, who do you show your worst sides to? The people you love. My intense irritability.
That's not why lefties criticize Israel, because they love
most
them.
By people who are closest to me, because if I expressed it to absolutely everybody I met at a party or a social setting, it would be hard. There's a tendency to lean heavily on the people who are closest to you, the people who will put up with it. And something similar happens in international politics. You pressure the people who will listen. It's one of the things you hear a lot in the last years. People sort of ignoramuses in the governments in places like Britain, will say, we need to put more pressure on the Israelis to do X. And you go, well, in part that's because they will listen. If you go, we need to put more pressure on the Ayatollahs in Iran to persuade them that Hamas are really bad and they shouldn't be doing this. Right? What the hell do you think they're going to do? They're going to listen to you? They're going to give a damn? You're talking totally different worlds. Not just a different language, it's a different world. And by the way, that happens in Israel. I mentioned it earlier, it happens in Israel. When the Hostage Families Forum came about, I spent a lot of time there, got to know a lot of the families, and they're remarkable. But one of the things you did notice from them as well was that a lot of them, they protest outside Netanyahu's house, they klaxon horns and make sure he can never sleep. They will, put up great big posters by his house of him with bloodied hands and so on. And I have, I think as much sympathy as you can for these families. The plight of knowing that your child is sitting in a tunnel in Gaza for a year, a day, an hour is intolerable. But there's a reason why the families protested Netanyahu, and that's because Sinwar didn't care. That wouldn't work. If you said, understand my plight, I'm a Jewish mother and my daughter is thing. You think Sinwar, the heads of Hamas, care? You think the leaders in Qatar who host them care? The Qatari emir's mother, when Sinwar was killed, praised Sinwar. You couldn't talk that language to these people, but you can talk that language to the elected Prime Minister of Israel. Because first of all, he's somebody who might listen to your pressure, could be pressured. And secondly, is simply the only person you can pressure. There's no one else. Hamas doesn't care. Hezbollah doesn't care. The Iranian Revolutionary Government doesn't care.
Yeah, so let's just sort of say, once again, the obvious thing, that while it is possible to discuss Hamas soldiers as freedom fighters, I'm not one of the folks that can take that perspective. It's a tough one to take.
Tank in a rocket?
So this goes to the man from the land of peace and the man from the land of war. There's a lived experience of what it means to grow up in Gaza. And if you fully load that into your brain in a real way, not using the words of good and evil, but in a very deep human sense, from that place of desperation, when your home and your family is destroyed, doesn't matter why, doesn't matter if there's evil all around you that caused it, doesn't matter. The facts are the facts. And from that place, somebody who's fighting for you can feel like a freedom fighter. I think it should be called out that, yes, it can feel that way from the lived experience. But
can
Hamas
I load up the equipment inventory of the
since
tank?
We're talking about Netanyahu. Hamas is evil. Okay. Now, you can still, in that context, discuss the degree to which Netanyahu is the right leader for this moment and whether he goes too far, whether he's too politically selfish in the decisions he makes, whether he's too much a warmonger, whether he's utilizing the war for his own political gains, and is not caring about the death of civilians in Gaza, for example, but more caring about his own political maintaining power. That's a perspective that I could steel man. That's a perspective worth discussing, and that's a perspective many in Israel hold when they criticize Netanyahu. He's increasingly less and less popular.
That's wrong. Opinion polls last month when he was in Washington, he showed him at an all-time high. But you were saying,
I make my own poll, and according to my poll, I'm the greatest, I'm the nicest and the coolest person in the world. 100% of people agree.
So I didn't mean to laugh that much.
Yeah. You laughed a little too much.
Too long.
It's more than the joke, yeah.
But you were saying, I mean,
Okay, let's steel man the criticism of Netanyahu. Can you, and then steel man the case for him, that he's the right leader, actually, at this moment.
the most devastating thing that anyone can come up against Netanyahu is that the 7th happened on his watch.
True.
After the Yom Kippur War in 1973, Golda Meir, who was
That entire
very distinguished Prime
government
Minister of
was
Israel,
gone.
a remarkable woman, but she effectively took the political hit
Rip.
for the Yom Kippur invasion by Israel's Arab neighbors happening on her watch. And I'd have thought that most critics, fair-minded critics of Netanyahu, inside Israel and without, would always hold that against him. I suppose that one of the criticisms you hear a lot as well is this thing of Israel being divided in the year before the 7th because of the judicial reforms. I think there's a strong case for the judicial reforms in Israel, but it's a sort of niche Israeli governance issue, which we don't have to get into. The point is that Netanyahu and his government were pushing these reforms through, judicial reforms, and it was very divisive. And on the streets of Tel Aviv and other cities every weekend, there were protests, and the police were tired because they'd spent week after week on overtime policing these protests, which often turned raucous, not to say violent, but sometimes violent. And you could say, well, if you see that something is dividing your country this much, why don't you stop? There is a claim by some people that one of the things that prompted the 7th was that Hamas and its backers in Qatar and Iran saw the division in Israeli society, saw the Israeli population, a significant chunk of it every week on the streets, shutting down highways, shutting down services and so on, and thought, good, now's the time. In other words, what I quoted Sinwar as saying earlier when he was in prison in Israel was, this thing, one day you'll be weak and then I'll strike. Maybe that is one of the things that Sinwar thought. Israel was very weak. It had been divided, and therefore it was time to strike. There's an argument against that, which is that the 7th was in preparation and being planned before the judicial reform process in Israel began. So you can look at it several ways. But you could use that. You could say, look, this is, if your nation was divided, don't push through any more on that. There's lots of things like that. You could say that Netanyahu was one of the people responsible for the conception. You could there were critics of his, including critics who were in the war cabinet, who thought that he was too focused on Hamas and not focused enough on Hezbollah. Other people think he was too focused on Hezbollah and not enough on Hamas. There's them and many other criticisms that people make of him. I would say I've interviewed, I think, every political leader in Israel from right to left, pretty much. And I have to say, I don't think there's any of them that wouldn't have responded similarly to the 7th of October, to the way he has.
Okay, so that's inside Israel. Outside of Israel, despite what he said, he is one of the most hated people in the world. Just the raw quantity. Now, relative, he's loved by a lot of people, but there's a lot of people that, there's a lot of psychological effects that might explain that.
I mean, it's sort of strange if there is a widespread global loathing of the prime minister of a country of 8 to 9 million people.
Yeah, that might mean something more than hatred of the military actions and the policies of the one person. Yeah.
I mean, there's an awful lot of people to hate in the world. There's a lot of wars in the world. It's always of interest. I mean, obviously, one of the things I go into on democracies and death cults is this question of why is this so galvanizing for so many people? And I think that is a very, very interesting question. Why? By the way,
got everything. Israel-Palestine has everything you could ever want from a conflict. Brown versus white, rich versus poor, West versus East, Jew versus Arab, first world versus second world. It's every possible thing. Religious, Jew versus everything you could ever want in a conflict. Everything you could ever want in a conflict is there for you.
Let me do a quick addendum to that. You can notice something else like that when people talk about the Republican failures in foreign policy in the last 30 years or so. It's very interesting. There's a certain type of person who will immediately mention Paul Wolfowitz.
Yeah.
And they will say, well, Wolfowitz. You go, you mean Deputy Undersecretary of Defense under George W. Bush? You think he guided everything? Why would that be? Other than the fact that his name, as Mark Stein once said, starts with a nasty animal and ends Jewish.
Based.
I mean,
that's a good
so
line.
I do think that there are very deep things at play.
It's a good line.
There are very deep things at play. Netanyahu, irrespective of anything he does, for a lot of people, is a kind of devil. And you have to say, well, why is that? Now, of course, some people will say, well, that's because his terrible hawkishness and his actions and so on and so forth. The case for Netanyahu is that he sees it as his historic purpose to defend the only homeland of the Jewish people, and that's his life's mission. And on that basis, I think he's been, by any measure, a historic leader. He has warned the world about the threat from the mullahs in Tehran. He warned about Iranian revolutionary expansionism across the region, across Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. And after the 7th, he has held together a very, very difficult set of challenges to keep international pressure at a tolerable level, to do all sorts of things, but most importantly, to oversee the 2 war aims that he set out at the beginning. I thought, let me just express this way, I thought, like a lot of people, when I heard about the hostages, my immediate instinct was they're all dead. They're all going to be dead. We'll never see them again. And that was the attitude of a lot of Israelis. But although there are still hostages being held, and as I've always said, the war could end tomorrow if they were handed back, or at least the beginning of the end of the war could begin tomorrow if they were handed back. Nevertheless, because of the actions of not just Netanyahu, but the Israeli government, most of the hostages have been returned, did not expect this to happen. And Hamas has not been completely destroyed, but it has been very, very...
I mean, not to take away anything from the Israeli war effort, but like a lot of the reason for that is also because Hamas didn't want to kill every single hostage immediately. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of having a hostage if you immediately kill all of them as well, right? You can't do that. Also, for your favorite guy, I'm talking to Alex, playing with fire in like 1 minute. Let me use the restroom real quick. Hold on. Oh, fuck. I'm so curious what this... Fuck. I don't know if we'll watch the rest of this. He seems like a cool dude.
Murray and by Young Turks, founder and Democratic presidential challenger.
seeing Jank versus Douglas Murray. That's got to be crazy, but. What is this?
How much were those eggs? Oh, I can't remember. Maybe like $8.
What happened?
$8.
Holy shit. Her egg bowl was made out of the same stuff they make the PC case tempered glass out of.
Yo, what's up, buddy?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, you're kind of lagging a little bit.
Yeah, it looks pretty laggy. Why is that?
Yeah, I can't really hear anything you're saying. There's like a massive lag. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me just fine.
I mean, he can't hear me.
Yeah,
Why is
for
this
some
shit
reason on
lagging
your end,
so
you're
much?
like really frozen.
God,
Do you want to
I
maybe try
fucking hate
coming down,
StreamYard.
coming back?
Oh my god, I hate StreamYard. Oh my god, I hate StreamYard. Oh my god, I hate StreamYard. Why does he use this fucking thing, this browser app still?